The cast-iron sewing machine sitting on the curb wasn't just garbage. It was the moment I stopped being a patient mother and became a chief auditor of my own life. I'm Martha, 68 years old, retired chief nursing officer, and the absolute owner of this house. My daughter-in-law thinks I'm some doddering old woman who sits around watching soap operas and reminiscing. What she forgot is that I spent 40 years diagnosing problems before patients even knew they were sick. Nobody prepares you for the day you become furniture in your own home. Not a valuable antique that people polish with care and display with pride, but one of those old chairs cluttering the hallway that nobody knows how to throw away without feeling guilty. I was sitting in my reading nook with half-finished Earl Grey tea and my legs covered by a cotton throw, waiting to see if the protagonist in Hearts Aflame would finally confess her secret. It was my 4 o'clock ritual, a sacred, simple moment that belonged to me. The house was quiet, or so I thought. My ears, trained by 40 years of monitoring beeping machines and whispered emergencies in hospital corridors, caught the sound of stiletto heels clicking against the hardwood floor in the foyer. It was Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, a woman who walks like the floor owes her money and speaks like she has a megaphone lodged in her throat. She entered the living room like a hurricane of expensive perfume and bad intentions. She didn't greet me. She never does. To her, greetings are a waste of time with someone who provides no social value. She positioned herself directly in front of the television, blocking my view just as the climactic scene was about to unfold. "Enough of this garbage," she shouted, and her voice bounced off walls lined with my books she's never opened. Before I could even blink or ask what was wrong, Tiffany bent down with an agility she used more for drama than actual work, and with one violent yank, ripped out the cable cord. She didn't disconnect it carefully, she tore it out. I heard the plastic crack and watched the image dissolve into gray static before the screen went completely black. The television fell silent, dark, dead. I sat there with my teacup suspended in midair, feeling the warm steam moisten my nose. My heart started racing, not from fear, but from a mixture of disbelief and a vicarious embarrassment so profound it churned my stomach. "In this house, we consume intelligent content, Martha," she said, using my first name like an insult. "No, ma'am. No, Mrs. Not even a hypocritical attempt at respect. I'm sick of coming home to these screaming soap operas on the TV. You're lowering our intellectual standards." Lowering standards? I thought. But my voice wouldn't come out. I, who cataloged over 50,000 medical journals and patient files. I, who trained 3 generations of nursing students. I, who can recite Florence Nightingale from memory and explain the difference between acute and chronic symptom management. I was being lectured about intelligence by a woman who thinks culture is sharing misquoted phrases on social media and buying minimalist furniture nobody can actually use. But before we get into the story, please support us by liking and subscribing right now. I also want to say hi. Leave your name, city, and the word present in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from, even in faraway places. At that moment, the front door opened again. It was Jason, my son, my boy, the child I taught to tie his shoes and respect his elders. He walked in with his synthetic leather briefcase, wearing that expression of perpetual exhaustion he uses as a shield. He saw his wife standing there with the cable in her hand, breathing heavily as if she'd just saved the world from nuclear catastrophe. Then he looked at me, frozen on the couch. I waited. I swear on my late husband's memory that I waited. I waited for him to say, "Tiffany, what are you doing? Respect my mother." I waited for him to remind her that this is my house, that they've been here for 2 years because they lost their condo due to bad investments, and I opened my doors so they wouldn't sleep on the street. I waited for a gesture, a word, a look of apology. But Jason did something worse than yelling. Jason smiled, a weak, compliant, cowardly smile, and then he applauded. "Bravo, honey," he said, setting his briefcase on the floor. "It's about time someone brought order here. That TV blaring all day numbs the atmosphere. We need productive vibes. My son's applause was the most painful sound I'd ever heard in my life. More painful than my arthritis diagnosis. More painful than the sound of the door closing when my husband left for the hospital and never came back. It was the sound of absolute betrayal. He was applauding his mother's humiliation to please the woman who controls even the air he breathes. I remained silent on the couch. I didn't cry. Nurses learn to maintain silence in the face of unnecessary noise. I lowered my teacup to the coffee table carefully, making sure not to make a single sound. The cork coaster received the porcelain gently. "Well, I'm going to make some organic green tea," Tiffany announced, tossing the broken cable to the floor like a snake's shed skin. "And you, Martha, should read something about economics or neuroscience. Maybe then you'll understand why the world is the way it is and stop living in fantasy. It's terrible for your cortisol levels." They walked past me as if I were invisible. They went into the kitchen, my kitchen that I designed 30 years ago with its subway tiles I selected one by one. I heard them opening my refrigerator, using my kettle, laughing. They were laughing with that complicity of people who believe they've won a battle against a defenseless enemy. I stared at the black television screen. In the dark reflection, I saw my silhouette. A woman with white hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a cream-colored linen blouse. I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who had made the mistake of being too generous. For 2 years, I'd endured their hints. "This house is too big for one person," they'd say. "These old furnishings collect dust and allergens. You should sell and move somewhere more, assisted." They'd gradually occupied spaces. First the guest room, then the study where I used to read, converting it into a project office that was always cluttered. They'd changed the curtains without asking. They'd thrown out my geranium pots because they attracted insects. And I had allowed it. I'd allowed it out of love for Jason, thinking it was a phase, that they needed support. But that broken cable on the floor told me it wasn't a phase. It was a conquest. And I was the territory to be colonized and eventually discarded. The afternoon fell, and the living room filled with shadows. I didn't turn on the lights. I liked the twilight. It helped me think. I could hear their voices in the dining room, talking about a trip they wanted to take, a new car they wanted to buy. With what money, I wondered. Surely they were planning to ask me for another loan they'd never repay. Or perhaps, and this chilled my blood, they were already calculating the value of my house. I stood up slowly. My knees creaked, a reminder that time passes, but my back remained straight. I walked to the broken cable lying on the floor. I picked it up. It wasn't trash. It was evidence. I rolled it with the same meticulousness I used to roll bandages in the ER and tucked it into my cardigan pocket. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, passing the open door of what used to be Jason's childhood room, now converted into their master bedroom. I saw how they'd painted the walls a modern gray that made the room look like a luxury cell. I saw clothes scattered everywhere. Tiffany talks about intelligence and order, but lives in chaos. I entered my room and locked the door. It was a soft click, but definitive. I sat at my old oak desk, the only piece of furniture Tiffany hadn't dared touch because it was too heavy to move. I turned on my reading lamp, the one with warm light that has illuminated my nights for decades. My hands trembled slightly. I won't deny it. Anger is a powerful energy, but at my age, it's also exhausting. However, my mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years. "Intelligent content," she'd said. "Very well. Let's be intelligent." I opened the third drawer of my desk, the one with a false bottom my husband built to store the love letters we wrote when we were dating. But there weren't just letters there. I pulled out a book, not just any book, but a vintage leather-bound edition of Gray's Anatomy. Tiffany would never touch this book. To her, an old book equals filth, not history. I opened the book to chapter 12, where the text discusses the cardiovascular system's resilience under stress. There, between the yellowed pages that smelled of vanilla and thyme, was the manila envelope. I pulled it out and extracted the document. The deed to the house. Sole proprietor. Martha Elizabeth Caldwell, widow of Thomas Caldwell. The black letters on the legal paper seemed to glow under the lamplight. Jason always assumed that when his father died, the house passed into both our names or that he had some immediate legal right. He never bothered to read the complete will. He was never interested in paperwork. "That's boring, Mom. You handle it," he'd always say. And I handled it. Boy, did I handle it. I ran my fingers over the notary seal. This house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was my life. Here I'd cared for my husband during his long illness. Here I'd organized community health fairs for neighborhood families. Here I'd cried, laughed, and lived. And now 2 intruders thought they could turn off my television and my existence because they felt superior. I removed my reading glasses and rubbed my eyes. I thought about Jason applauding. That applause kept echoing in my head like a slap. I'd raised a weak man. That was my fault, my great failure. I'd protected him so much that now he sought someone to tell him what to do, even if that person despised him as much as she despised me. But a mother's love has limits, and that limit is dignity. Friends, every story I tell you is released every day, but YouTube will only show them to you if you tap the red subscribe button. Please do it now while I'm speaking. Tap subscribe, turn on notifications, and you'll never miss a story. Have you done it yet? Thank you. I looked at the wall clock. It was 9 at night. Downstairs, the noise had ceased. They were probably watching some pretentious documentary on their tablet or sleeping the sleep of the unjust. I took a sheet of paper and my fountain pen, the one that requires patience to load with ink. Writing by hand helps me organize my thoughts. I made a list. It wasn't a shopping list. It was a battle plan. 1. Locksmith. 2. Attorney. Call Attorney Hernandez, old colleague from the hospital board. 3. Bank account. Review shared access permissions. I paused at point 3. A year ago, Jason convinced me to make him co-signer on my savings account in case of emergencies. The only emergency that had occurred was Tiffany's lifestyle. Tomorrow, that would end. I lay in my bed but couldn't sleep immediately. I stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible cracks in the paint. I felt a strange calm. For months I'd felt small, cornered, afraid to make waves. I'd tiptoed through my own home to avoid triggering Tiffany's rage or Jason's indifference. But today's act of violence, that ripped cable, had also broken the fear. They thought television was my only entertainment, my only connection to the world. They didn't understand that soap operas were just a pause. My real life, my real strength, resided in what I'd learned among thousands of medical texts and patient charts: strategy, patience, and the right moment to act. The Count of Monte Cristo didn't scream. He waited, and I had waited too long. The next morning, I woke before them. I heard their alarms, their hurried showers, their morning complaints about traffic and work. I stayed in my room until I heard the final door slam and the car engine fade into the distance. I descended the stairs. The house was silent, but this time it was a different silence. Not the silence of loneliness, but of anticipation. I went to the living room. The television remained mute, the broken cable hanging sadly. I looked at it and smiled. "Don't worry," I whispered to the device. "Soon we'll watch whatever we want." I went to the kitchen and made myself strong, black coffee, no sugar, just how I like it and how Tiffany says is poison for the nerves. I drank it standing, looking out at the garden they'd neglected. Then I walked to the landline phone, that antique device they wanted to throw away because nobody uses landlines anymore. I dialed the number I'd found in my old paper address book. "Guardian Locksmith Service," a voice answered. I spoke with a firm, clear, professional voice, the voice of the chief nursing officer who commanded silence in a room full of rowdy medical students. "Yes, I need urgent service. Complete lock change on all doors. Yes, right now. I'll pay cash." I hung up the phone. I felt an electric current run down my spine. It wasn't fear. It was power. I sat in my armchair, this time without turning on the television. I didn't need it. The real drama was about to begin, and I had the best seat in the house. I looked toward the front door, imagining the expression on their faces when they tried to insert their key, and it wouldn't turn. I imagined Tiffany pushing, Jason confused. I imagined their intelligent things staying outside on the sidewalk, while I, inside, enjoyed my garbage in peace. The doorbell rang 30 minutes later. It wasn't them. It was a short man in blue overalls with a heavy toolbox. "Good morning, ma'am. You called for a lock change?" I looked him in the eyes and smiled with a sweetness I didn't feel but knew how to use very well. "Not just a change, young man," I said, opening the door wide. "I want you to change everything. Nothing that worked before should work now. I want absolute security." The locksmith nodded and got to work. The sound of the drill boring through the metal of the door was music to my ears. Much better than any symphony, much more intelligent than any podcast. It was the sound of my life returning to my hands. While he worked, I pulled the broken cable from my pocket. I looked at it one last time and threw it in the trash. The signal was cut off for them. My transmission, however, was just beginning. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down to wait. I knew they'd return at 6. I had 8 hours to prepare the rest of the scene. 8 hours to stop being the old woman on the couch and return to being Martha Caldwell, the woman who brings order to chaos. And woe to anyone who tried to disorder my library again. The electric drill's buzz, biting into the wood of the doorframe, resonated throughout the house like a war anthem. Don Ramirez, the locksmith, was a man of few words and hands full of grease, exactly the type of ally I needed at that moment. While he dismantled the old mechanism that had allowed my tormentors entry for 2 years, I decided it was time to conduct my own inspection. I climbed the stairs with a calm I didn't feel inside. My heart was pumping hard, but my legs, strengthened by decades of long hospital shifts and carrying medical equipment, didn't falter. I headed directly to what used to be my reading room, that sanctuary of light and peace that Tiffany and Jason had colonized under the pretentious name, The Office. I turned the doorknob. It was cold. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first, a rancid mixture of fast food, sweet perfume, and that peculiar odor paper gets when left to dampen. What I saw chilled my blood more than any hospital emergency. My bookshelves, the ones my late husband had sanded and varnished by hand, were crammed with junk. There were no books. They'd moved my medical encyclopedias to the garage, I later learned, to make room for designer shoe boxes, modern art figurines that looked like twisted wire, and stacks of fashion magazines. But I wasn't there to lament the decor. I was there looking for ammunition. Tiffany had said this house was for intelligent content. I approached the desk, a tempered glass table always covered in fingerprints. I started searching, not like a mother snooping, but like a chief auditor conducting inventory, methodical, clinical, looking for the error in the system. I pushed aside an empty pizza box and found a mountain of unopened correspondence. Most was addressed to Jason, but mixed among his credit card bills, I saw something that made my breath catch. A white envelope with the bank logo addressed to me. Mrs. Martha Caldwell. My hands, which have turned thousands of patient charts with care, tore open the envelope violently. It was a statement for a platinum credit card, a card I never applied for, a card I didn't know existed. My eyes scanned the list of transactions, and I felt sudden dizziness, forcing me to lean against the desk's edge. The Sky Restaurant, $3,500. Verona Boutique, $8,200. Tech Global Spa, $4,000. Luxury Wellness Retreat, $15,000. The list continued. It totaled nearly $80,000 in a single month. At the bottom of the page, I saw the issue date, 6 months ago. They'd been intercepting my mail. They'd forged my signature, my son, my own blood. The child I taught that stealing a pencil was a sin was robbing my retirement to finance the whims of a woman who despised me. I sank into Tiffany's swivel chair. The synthetic leather squeaked under my weight. I looked around that cluttered room and felt a wave of nausea. It wasn't just the money, it was the mockery, the absolute lack of respect. While they ate at luxury restaurants and bought clothes they didn't need, they scolded me if I left a light on to save electricity. While Tiffany yelled at me about watching my shows, she was living a millionaire fantasy paid for with my assets. Intelligent content, I whispered bitterly. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a scalpel. I stayed there for several minutes, breathing deeply, forcing air into my lungs to cool the lava rising up my neck. For years they'd treated me as if my brain had dried up along with my skin. They looked at me with that unbearable condescension, explaining simple things slowly, as if I didn't understand how the world works. "Mom, you don't understand modern finances," Jason would tell me. "Martha, the world has changed. It's not like your time," Tiffany would say. They were right. The world had changed. In my time, loyalty meant something. In my time, you didn't steal from your mother. But they forgot something fundamental. I spent 40 years organizing medical knowledge and hospital operations. I know how to classify, I know how to investigate, and above all, I know how to find what's lost or hidden. I stood up and kept searching. In the desk drawer, I found Tiffany's planner. I opened it at random. Her handwriting was large, round, childish. On next week's page was a note surrounded by hearts, meeting with architect, expansion project, goodbye old lady's room, hello, dream closet. There was the final sentence. They weren't just robbing me, they were planning to erase me. My bedroom, my refuge, was going to be converted into a closet for their stolen clothes. Surely the plan included sending me to some cheap nursing home, paid for with what little remained of my pension after they finished looting me. I closed the planner gently. A cold metallic calm settled in my chest. There was no more pain. Pain is for those who have hope that things will change on their own. I no longer had that hope. Now I had data. I had evidence. I took the bank statement and the planner. I descended the stairs just as Don Ramirez was tightening the last screw on the front door. "All done, boss," he said, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. "High security lock, reinforced cylinder. Not even air gets in here if you don't want it to." "And the back door?" I asked. "That too, and the service patio door, all changed. Here are the keys, 5 copies just in case." He handed me the keyring. They gleamed new, heavy. They were much more than pieces of carved metal. They were the scepter of my recovered kingdom. I paid him in cash, pulling bills from my purse with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. I gave him a generous tip. "Thank you, Don Ramirez. You've done more for me today than my own family has in 2 years." The man looked at me, perhaps noticing the hard glint in my eyes, and simply nodded with respect before collecting his toolbox and leaving. I closed the door behind him and turned the deadbolt. The metallic click resonated definitively. I was alone again, but this time the solitude didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibilities. If you want to know how this story ends and discover many more, hit the red subscribe button. It's free, and it helps me a lot. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I looked at the clock. It was 11 in the morning. I had time. My administrative mind began cataloging the steps to follow. First, the bank. I had to go in person. I couldn't call by phone. I needed them to see me, to see the account holder alive and furious. I needed to dispute those charges and freeze that card immediately. And while I was at it, revoke Jason's access to my savings account. "For emergencies," he'd said. Well, the emergency had arrived. Second, evidence. I wasn't going to confront them with screams. That's what a soap opera character would do, as Tiffany would say. I was going to confront them with facts. I was going to make copies of everything. Third, luggage. I went up to their bedroom, that gray, cluttered cave. I pulled out 2 large suitcases they kept in the closet. They were expensive suitcases, of course. I began filling them, not carefully. I didn't fold anything. I threw in Tiffany's clothes, her high heels, her creams, her hair straighteners. I threw in Jason's suits, his ties, his video games. As I tossed their belongings into the suitcases, I caught my reflection in the vanity mirror. An older woman with white hair and a simple house dress. But my eyes weren't those of a helpless elderly woman. They were the eyes of someone who had read The Art of War and The Count of Monte Cristo enough times to know that revenge is best served when you have total control of the terrain. I filled 4 suitcases, forced them shut, dragged them to the hallway, and then one by one hauled them down the stairs. They were heavy, of course, but adrenaline is wonderful fuel. I left them at the entrance, lined up like defeated soldiers. Then I went to my library, pulled out a sheet of white bond paper, took a thick black marker, and wrote a message. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Good literature is concise. I taped the paper to the inside of the front door, visible through the small side window they used to peer through before opening. I sat in my armchair in front of the turned-off television, its cut cable still hanging like a witness to the crime. But I no longer felt sad about my interrupted show. My own story had become much more interesting. I looked at the new keys in my hand, running my thumb over the serrated edges. I imagined the moment when Jason would try to insert his old key. I imagined the confusion, the struggle, the disbelief. I imagined Tiffany huffing, indignant that her intelligent key no longer worked in the old fool's house. Everything was ready. The stage was set. The main actors were about to arrive for their final performance, only this time I'd written the script. The phone rang. It was the bank confirming a suspicious transaction that had just been attempted. "Mrs. Caldwell, someone is trying to charge $3,000 at a wine and spirits store. Do you authorize this?" I smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, miss," I responded with a firm voice. "I don't authorize anything. In fact, I want to report that card as stolen, and I want everything blocked. Absolutely everything. Right now." I hung up the phone. The silence returned to the house, but now it was a silence charged with static electricity, like the air before a summer storm. I settled into my armchair, crossed my legs, and waited. The sound of an approaching engine broke the quiet of the afternoon. It was them. They were arriving early, probably to celebrate some other empty victory with my money. What a shame the party had been canceled. The metallic sound of the key scraping against the new lock was the first note of my particular symphony. I was sitting in the wingback chair directly facing the entrance, hands folded in my lap and back straight, as if I were monitoring the nurse's station during the night shift. I heard Jason's grunt on the other side of the wood. "What's wrong?" Tiffany asked, in that impatient tone she uses when the world doesn't spin at her speed. "It won't go in," my son replied. I heard him forcing the metal, turning left, then right, pulling the key out and jamming it back in roughly. "It's stuck. Must be dirty or something." "Oh, for God's sake, Jason, useless even at opening a door. Give me that." The clicking of Tiffany's heels approached. There was a brief silence, followed by a more aggressive attempt. The old key collided with Don Ramirez's security mechanism like a paper boat against an icebreaker. There was no way. Physics was on my side, and so was German engineering. I didn't move an inch. I could see their distorted silhouettes through the frosted side window, 2 shadows flailing like flies trapped between 2 panes of glass. I brought my coffee cup to my lips. It was cold, but it tasted glorious. It was the taste of autonomy. "Martha!" Tiffany shouted, pounding the wood with her open palm. "Martha, open up! The key doesn't work!" My name in her mouth always sounded like an accusation. She never called. I set down my cup. I didn't stand up. Not yet. I wanted them to feel, if only for 5 minutes, what I'd felt for 2 years. The powerlessness of being locked out, of not being heard, of being ignored by those in control. "She probably fell asleep with the TV blasting," Jason said, his voice filtering through with a mixture of feigned concern and real annoyance. "Or she forgot to unlock the deadbolt. You know how she gets." "Well, she better wake up." "I need to use the bathroom. And I want to put these bags down, Tiffany whined. They started ringing the doorbell, once, twice, 3 times. The ding-dong resonated in the empty house, bouncing off walls where my framed nursing certifications used to hang, now just spots of discoloration they'd promised to repaint and never did. I stood up slowly, smoothing invisible wrinkles in my skirt. I walked toward the entrance, but not to open it. I stopped 3 feet from the door, watching the knob turn uselessly from outside. It was fascinating to see how arrogance crumbles before a simple mechanical obstacle. They, who thought they owned the world and my retirement, couldn't cross a pine threshold. "Mom!" Jason bellowed, pressing his mouth to the doorframe. "Mom, answer me! Are you okay?" I decided it was time for my first move. A nurse never shouts. She projects her voice. "I'm perfectly fine, Jason," I said in a calm, almost casual tone, as if we'd seen each other 5 minutes ago. "No need to shout. I'm not deaf, just busy." The silence on the other side was sepulchral for a second. They didn't expect to find me standing there, lucid and awake, right behind the door. They expected the confused old lady, the servile mother who runs to open the door, apologizing for the delay. "Then why aren't you opening?" Tiffany snapped, recovering her usual venom. "This stupid key won't turn. What did you do to the lock?" "The key won't turn because it's no longer the key to this house, Tiffany," I replied, savoring each syllable. "What are you talking about?" Jason intervened with that condescending tone he uses to explain how to use the remote control. "Mom, stop playing games. We had a brutal day. Open the door." I approached the peephole. I could see my son's fisheye distorted face, sweaty and bewildered, and behind him Tiffany checking her phone angrily. "It's not a game, son. It's a security measure. I've noticed certain irregularities in the household administration, and as the owner, I've taken steps to protect the property." "What irregularities? What are you talking about?" Jason sounded genuinely confused. Denial is a powerful mechanism. He really believed what they were doing was normal, that they had a right to my life. "Oh, Jorge, your mother's having one of her episodes," Tiffany interrupted, putting away her phone in her designer purse, probably bought with my money. "Martha, open the door right now, or we'll call a locksmith to break it down. I don't have time for your senile delusions." I smiled. The locksmith threat. "How ironic. Go ahead," I said. "Call whoever you want, but I'm warning you. The deed to the house is in here with me." And police usually ask for proof of ownership before breaking down an elderly woman's door. I heard agitated whispering outside. Tiffany was hissing things in Jason's ear. I could imagine it. "Do something! She's crazy! Get us out of here!" Jason sighed heavily. That sigh he used to soften my heart when he was a child and broke a glass. "Mom, please." His voice changed, becoming soft, manipulative. "I don't know what's gotten into you today." "Is it about the TV yesterday? Look, we'll buy you a new one. A flat screen, smart TV, so you can watch your programs. But let us in. Tiffany isn't feeling well." The lie flowed from his lips with unsettling ease. They weren't carrying any television. They weren't carrying anything but their demands and their selfishness. "I don't need a new television, Jason, and Tiffany isn't sick. She's furious because her card was declined at the liquor store an hour ago." The silence outside became thick, heavy. I'd dropped the first bomb, confirmation that I knew, that the tap had been shut off. "How do you know that?" Tiffany asked, her voice no longer containing arrogance, but a thread of cold fear. "Because the bank calls me Tiffany, the account holder, the owner of the money you spend on intelligent content." I turned the security latch, the one that allowed me to crack the door open without removing the chain. I opened the door about 4 inches. Afternoon light entered the foyer, illuminating the 4 suitcases waiting in formation like soldiers in a line. Jason tried to stick his hand through the gap, but the taut chain stopped him. He saw me. He saw my clear eyes, without glasses, fixed on his. He saw my upright posture. Then he looked down and saw the suitcases. He recognized his luggage, that navy blue suitcase I gave him when he graduated from college, Tiffany's garish red one. "What? What is this?" Jason stammered, stepping back. It's your luggage, I said simply. I saved you the trouble of packing. I was very careful, although I must admit Tiffany's clothes take up too much space for so little fabric. You went through our things? Tiffany shrieked, trying to peer over Jason's shoulder. You touched my clothes? That's invasion of privacy. Invasion? I let out a dry, brief laugh. Invasion is converting my study into a garbage dump. Invasion is stealing my bank correspondence. Invasion is planning to remodel my bedroom while I'm still alive in it. Jason went pale. The color drained from his face as if someone had pulled a plug in his heels. Mom, you read the planner? I read enough. Goodbye, old lady's room, right? Well, it turns out the old lady has other plans, and the first plan is to recover her space. I unhooked the chain with a quick movement and opened the door completely. Jason stepped forward, thinking he'd won, that I'd given in, but I planted myself in the threshold. I'm not a large woman, but at that moment, I felt gigantic. Take your suitcases, I ordered, pointing at the luggage with a firm finger. Everything's there. Clothes, shoes, cosmetics, and that ridiculous magazine collection you call culture. You can't do this to us, Jason said, and for the first time I saw real panic in his eyes. Not the panic of losing a luxury, but the panic of a child realizing Mom isn't going to fix the mess anymore. We have nowhere to go. You lost your condo, I know, and I opened my house to you. I gave you shelter, food, and without knowing it, my credit card. But hospitality is paid for with respect, Jason, and you're bankrupt, morally bankrupt. Tiffany pushed Jason aside and stood in front of me. Her eyes were bloodshot with fury. This is illegal, she screamed, waving her index finger in front of my nose. I have rights. I've been living here for 2 years. If you kick us out like this, I'll sue you. I'll take everything, even your old books. I looked at her with a calm that unsettled her. 2 days ago, that threat would have made me tremble. Today, it seemed like a spoiled child's tantrum. Do it, I said, lowering my voice so she'd have to strain to hear me. Call a lawyer. But make sure it's a good one, because my attorney, Mr. Hernandez, already has copies of the falsified bank statements with my forged signature. He has the dates, the amounts, and the security camera footage from the stores where you used my card. Banking fraud against a senior citizen is a serious crime, Tiffany. It's punishable by prison. Tiffany stood with her mouth open, frozen mid-threatening gesture. Her hand slowly lowered. She looked at Jason for support, but my son was staring at the ground, defeated before the battle even started. So you decide, I continued, resting one hand on the doorframe. You can leave now peacefully with your suitcases and your dignity intact, or you can stay and wait for the patrol car to arrive, because if you're not gone in 5 minutes, I'm reporting 2 intruders attempting to extort me. Jason looked up. His eyes were watery. Mom, I'm your son. That phrase they use as a free pass for everything. You are, I nodded, feeling a stab of pain in my chest, but I didn't let it show in my voice. And because you're my son, I'm giving you the chance to leave walking, not in handcuffs. Don't confuse love with stupidity, Jason. Not anymore. I grabbed the first suitcase, his, and pushed it forcefully outward. The wheels rolled across the tile floor, and the suitcase stopped near his feet. Then I pushed out Tiffany's, one by one. They left my house like excised tumors. The accounts are frozen, I informed them. The additional card has been canceled, and I've changed the locks, as you've noticed. Don't try to enter through the patio. I put new deadbolts there, too. Jason looked at the suitcases, then at me. He seemed to be seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. Maybe he'd never seen Martha Caldwell, the woman, only Mom, the resource. Where are we supposed to go, he asked, his voice broken. Somewhere you can afford with your own money, I replied. Maybe that way you'll learn how much life actually costs. You say this house is for intelligent content, right? Well, the most intelligent thing you can do now is grow up. Tiffany grabbed her red suitcase angrily, yanking it so hard she almost fell. Let's go, Jason, she spat. This old woman is crazy. She'll regret this when she's alone and rotting among her books. Nobody's going to visit you, Martha. You're going to die alone. Better alone than poorly accompanied and robbed, I replied without blinking. And don't worry about my loneliness. I have Cervantes, Garcia Marquez, and Austen. They're much more interesting conversationalists than you. I stepped back, entering the safety of my foyer again. Goodbye, Jason, I said, looking at him one last time. I hoped perhaps for an apology, a moment of redemption, but he just grabbed his suitcase and turned away, following his wife to the car. Cowardice is a hard habit to break. I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it firmly, with control. I heard the solid click of the new mechanism locking. I turned the deadbolt, fastened the chain. I stood there with my forehead against the cool wood, listening. I heard them start the car engine. I heard them accelerate, driving away down the street, taking their noise, their chaos, and their contempt with them. The silence returned to fill the house. But it was no longer the oppressive silence of before. I took a deep breath. The air smelled clean, of furniture wax and coffee. I turned and looked at my living room. It was empty of them. The television was still off with its broken cable, but it no longer seemed like a dead device. It seemed like a blank canvas. I walked to the kitchen. My hands no longer trembled. I felt light, as if I'd removed a lead coat I'd been wearing for years. But I knew this wasn't over. Tiffany wasn't a woman who accepted defeat, and Jason, though weak, was desperate. They'd come back or try something else. But for now, the fortress was mine. I went to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of white wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. I never found the right moment. Today was the moment. I poured myself a glass in Bohemian crystal. I sat in my armchair, put my feet up on the ottoman, and looked around. My books seemed to greet me from the distant hallway shelves. I had much to organize. I had to recover my study. I had to cleanse the energy from this house. But first, I had an unfinished appointment. I pulled out my cell phone, the one Tiffany said I didn't know how to use, and opened the cable company app. Good afternoon, I said when the operator answered. I want to report a service issue. Yes, I need a technician. And while you're at it, I'd like to upgrade my channel package. Yes, add all the history and documentary channels. But also add the classic soap opera channels. Yes, all of them. Because now in this house, I decide the programming. I hung up and took the first sip of my wine. It was delicious. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and violet. Inside, my life had just dawned. The first night of my new life, I slept as I hadn't in years. Deep, uninterrupted, embraced by the respectful silence of my own home. However, when I woke and drew back my bedroom curtains, reality was waiting for me on the sidewalk. There was Jason's car, a gray sedan he bought 6 months ago under the pretense that he needed a professional image for business. It was parked at an odd angle in front of my gate. The windows were fogged. They'd slept there. The image of my son, a 40-year-old man curled up in the back seat of a cold car, should have broken my heart. But then I remembered the credit card, the old ladies' room, and the mocking applause when Tiffany ripped out my cable. Pity is a luxury I could no longer afford. It's the crack through which abuse always seeps. I went downstairs to the kitchen and made myself a full breakfast, scrambled eggs with ham, toast, and orange juice. The smell of fresh coffee filled the first floor, an aroma I knew would filter out to the street if I opened a window slightly. I did. It was a petty act, I admit. But war is war. At 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell began ringing. It wasn't yesterday's insistent ring, but a long, continuous, desperate one. I took my time. I put on a navy blue dress, simple but elegant. I fixed my hair and applied a little lipstick. I took the cherry wood cane that had belonged to my late husband. I don't need it for walking. My legs are still strong. But there are objects that confer authority. A cane in hand transforms an old woman into a matriarch. I walked to the entrance. Opening the main door while keeping the security gate locked, I found a pitiful spectacle. Jason had a wrinkled shirt and deep, dark circles. Tiffany, without her battle makeup and with tangled hair, looked like she'd aged 10 years overnight. "Mom, please," Jason pleaded, his voice thick. "We need to come in. We need to shower. We're hungry. This has been enough of a lesson, hasn't it?" "We get it." Tiffany, leaning against the car hood, looked at me with pure hatred but kept her mouth shut. At least she'd learned some prudence, or so I thought. "Good morning, Jason," I greeted coldly. "I'm glad to see you're still in the neighborhood, though I regret to inform you this isn't a motel or a soup kitchen. It's my house." "It's my house too," Jorge exploded, hitting the gate. "I grew up here. I have rights." "You had privileges, Jason." Rights are earned through responsibility and lost through crime. At that moment, a police patrol car turned the corner. Blue and red lights bounced off neighboring house facades. I saw Mrs. Chen, the across-the-street neighbor who doesn't miss a thing, come out with her broom to sweep an already clean sidewalk. The public scene Tiffany so feared was about to be staged. Jason went pale. "You called the police? On your own son?" "No, Jason. I didn't call them," I said, frowning. The patrol stopped right behind their car. 2 officers got out, one young with a rookie face, the other an older man with a graying mustache and that tired look of someone who's seen too many domestic disputes. Tiffany straightened up immediately, and a crooked, almost triumphant smile appeared on her face. She walked toward the officers before they reached the gate. "Officers, thank God you're here!" Tiffany shouted, instantly adopting her victim role with a broken voice and fake tears springing from nowhere. "It's my mother-in-law. She's left us on the street. She has senile dementia, officers. She's very aggressive. She attacked us yesterday and changed the locks. We're afraid for her safety and ours." There it was, the master play, the crazy old lady card. Tiffany knew exactly which buttons to push. In our society, an older woman defending her territory is often quickly labeled as difficult, disturbed, or senile. The older officer approached the gate, looking at me with suspicion. Jason joined the farce, nodding, looking down like the long-suffering son dealing with a sick mother. "Ma'am," the officer said, resting his hand on his belt. "I'm Officer Martinez. These citizens report that you're denying them access to their residence and that you've shown erratic behavior. Can you open the gate, please?" I felt a chill in my stomach. If I opened it, they'd get in. If I refused, I'd look like the crazy person they were describing. The neighbors were already gathering. I could see their whispers. "Poor Martha, she's losing it. Look how she has her son on the street." I took a deep breath. The chief nursing officer in me took control. Knowledge is power, and calm is the weapon of the righteous. "Good morning, Officer Martinez," I replied with perfect diction, clear and calm. "I understand your concern. However, I inform you that this is my exclusive property. There's no dementia situation here, except the insanity of believing you can steal from your mother with impunity. I won't open the gate for them, but if you wish to enter alone to verify my condition and review certain legal documentation, I'll gladly allow you passage." The officer hesitated. He looked at Tiffany, still sobbing dramatically, then at me, an older woman, well-dressed, with an elegant cane and unshakable calm. "Wait here," he ordered his partner, pointing at Jason and Tiffany. "I'm going inside." I opened the gate and main door, just enough for him to pass. Jason tried to take advantage of the moment to stick his foot in. "Officer, it's my house," he shouted. "Back!" Officer Martinez ordered, stopping him with a firm hand. "I said I'm going to verify the situation. If the lady is the owner, she decides who enters." I closed the door behind us. The house's silence enveloped the officer, cutting off Tiffany's screams like a scalpel. I invited him into the living room. "Please sit. Would you like coffee?" "No, ma'am, thank you. I just want to know what's happening. Your daughter-in-law says that you're not in your right mind and that you threw them out without cause. Legally, if they live here, you can't just kick them out like that." I walked to the coffee table. There, perfectly aligned on a lace doily, were the documents I'd prepared the night before, that my attorney, Mr. Hernandez, had sent me digitally to print while I awaited his physical arrival later. Officer Martinez, what you see outside isn't an unjustified eviction. It's a protective measure against a crime in progress. I took the red folder. Here is the deed to the house. Sole owner, Martha Elizabeth Caldwell. No co-owners, no lifetime usufruct for my son. They lived here under my grace's guests. The officer took the paper, read it, and nodded. Okay, it's your house, but the eviction— I interrupted him gently, handing him the second, much thicker bundle of papers. Here are the bank account statements for the last 6 months. The officer frowned, confused. What does this have to do with anything? Look at the signatures on the store receipts. Look at the additional card application. I didn't sign that. My son and his wife forged my signature to obtain a credit card in my name. They've spent $80,000 on luxuries while I live on my pension. That, officer, is called fraud, breach of trust, and financial exploitation of a senior citizen. Officer Martinez stopped looking at the papers and looked into my eyes. His expression changed. The condescension disappeared, replaced by professional seriousness, and, I dare say, a touch of personal indignation. Do you have a report filed on this? My attorney is filing it this morning at the district attorney's office. I have an appointment at noon to ratify it. I threw them out yesterday because I discovered the theft. And what you see outside, those accusations about my dementia, is their desperate attempt to discredit me to avoid prison. At that moment, the officer's cell phone rang. He answered briefly. Understood. Yes, it's calm here. Pause. No, the lady is perfectly lucid. He hung up and looked at me with respect. Mrs. Caldwell, I apologize. We got a report of domestic violence, but I see where this is going now. If you want, I can ask them to leave for disturbing the peace. That's exactly what I want, I said, standing and leaning on my cane. But I want to tell them myself, with you present. We left the house. Seeing us emerge, Tiffany smiled, thinking the officer was taking me away or to a hospital. See, officer? See how she has everything inside? Probably has accumulated garbage, right? She shrieked. Officer Martinez walked to the gate with me at his side. He opened it but stood blocking the entrance, giving me space. Mrs. Tiffany, Mr. Jason, the officer said in a grave voice. I've reviewed Mrs. Caldwell's documentation. The house is hers. Pause. I've also seen evidence of alleged banking fraud. Tiffany's smile froze, then shattered like a mirror falling to the floor. Jason's eyes went wide, as if he'd taken a physical blow to the chest. What? Jason whispered. Mom, you didn't show him that. I showed him everything, Jason, I said, my voice resonating in the quiet street. The neighbors had stopped pretending and were openly watching. You said this house was for intelligent content. The intelligent thing when you've committed a crime is not to call the police to the scene of the crime. Tiffany tried to stammer something, but the officer cut her off. Listen carefully. Mrs. Caldwell is filing charges. If I were you, I'd find a lawyer and a place to stay, far from here. If you come back to harass, bang on the door, or defame the lady in public, I'll take you in right now for harassment and disturbing the peace. Clear? Jason looked at me. For the first time in years, I didn't see the spoiled child or the arrogant man. I saw a terrified human being who just grasped the magnitude of his error. He realized that Mom wasn't an inexhaustible resource, but a person with limits, and he'd crossed everyone. But Mom, we don't have money. You blocked everything, he whimpered. You have the car. I pointed at the gray vehicle. And you have your health to work. At your age, I'd already built a nursing career and raised a son. I'm sure you'll find a way to survive without stealing from me. You're a witch, Tiffany screamed, losing control and lunging toward the gate. The young officer put his hand on his weapon and stepped forward. Tiffany froze. Watch what you do, ma'am, Martinez warned. Get in your vehicle and leave, now. Jason grabbed Tiffany by the arm. She struggled, spitting insults, cursing my name and the day she met me. But he, with the fear of jail shining in his eyes, dragged her to the car. They shoved the suitcases they'd left on the curb into the trunk. The sound of closing doors was definitive. Jason started the engine. He looked at me one last time through the glass. I raised my hand, not to say goodbye, but to show him the way out of my life. The car pulled away, disappearing down the street, followed by the patrol car's watchful gaze. Mrs. Chen from across the street waved at me, a timid gesture of solidarity. I returned the greeting with a nod. The public shame Tiffany wanted for me had transformed into my vindication. The neighborhood didn't see a crazy old lady. They saw a woman who knows how to defend herself. Officer Martinez turned to me. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm going to file the report. If they come back, call 911 and ask for Unit 402. We'll be watching. And good luck with the charges. These cases are tough when it's family." "Family is those who care for you, officer, not those who rob you," I replied with soft but firm sadness. "Thank you for your professionalism." I entered my house and closed the door. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It was no longer a silence of waiting. It was a silence of victory. 3 months have passed since the locksmith changed my destiny with a drill and a new set of keys. Today my house smells of wood wax and fresh flowers, not the stale tension that permeated the walls when they lived here. The television is on, a new, modest but sharp screen I bought with my own money a week ago. Channel 5 is showing the finale of that soap opera, Tiffany interrupted, but the volume is low, almost a whisper in the background, because I have more important matters to attend to. My office, that room they'd converted into a monument to disorder and selfishness, has returned to being my sanctuary. It took weeks to cleanse the room's energy. I had to wash the curtains 3 times to remove the smell of menthol cigarettes and sand down the desk, to erase the marks of wet glasses left on the noble wood. But now my books are back on their shelves. Gray's Anatomy rests peacefully next to Florence Nightingale's Notes on Nursing. The silence reigning in the house isn't loneliness, it's sovereign, absolute peace. I no longer tiptoe. My steps resonate firmly on the tile. I wake up when I want, eat what I feel like. And most importantly, nobody tells me what's intelligent and what's garbage. Freedom, I've discovered, tastes very much like freshly ground coffee beans that I drink every morning looking at my garden, where the geraniums have bloomed again now that nobody tramples them with contempt. The situation with Jason and Tiffany resolved itself, though not without leaving scars that will take time to heal, if they ever do. There was no jail, but there was justice, which is sometimes more painful because it forces you to look in the mirror. Attorney Hernandez was relentless. When he presented the fraud evidence to the district attorney, Tiffany's arrogance deflated like a punctured balloon. She didn't expect the old librarian to have saved every account statement, every receipt, every date. We reached a reparative agreement to avoid criminal trial, mainly because, despite everything, I didn't want to see my son behind bars. But the conditions were harsh. Jason had to acknowledge the total debt of $80,000 and sign promissory notes before a notary. Now, every month, I receive a punctual deposit in my account. It's not much, small payments that will take him years to repay. But every dollar he returns is a lesson in humility he'd needed for decades. The saddest and yet most predictable thing was Tiffany. As soon as the flow of easy money stopped and the legal threat appeared, the love evaporated. She left 2 weeks after I threw them out, claiming Jason was a loser who didn't know how to treat a woman of her class. I found out from my son, who came to see me a few days ago to bring the first check. I received him at the door. I didn't let him into the living room. There are boundaries that, once crossed, close forever. I saw him thinner, with a cheap haircut, wearing a courier company uniform. "Tiffany left, Mom," he told me, head down, looking at his worn shoes. "I'm sorry, son," I replied. And it was true. I was sorry he had to learn through blows what he wouldn't learn through advice. But maybe now you'll understand that those who love you for what you have leave you when you lack it. Jason nodded, swallowing hard. "You were right about everything. I'm living in a room near downtown. It's small. I'm working double shifts to pay you back. That's good, Jason. Honest work cleanses the spirit. Keep it up. There were no hugs, no tears of movie reconciliation, just the sober recognition of two adults facing the consequences of their actions. He lost his inheritance, but gained the opportunity to build himself for the first time. And I lost the illusion of the perfect family, but recovered my intact dignity. But my victory didn't just stay with recovering my house and my money. I decided that the space I'd defended so fiercely couldn't remain just for me. Intelligent things, as my daughter-in-law used to say, are those that are shared and that help others grow. So I transformed the former Tiffany Project office into something real. I placed a discreet sign on the gate, reading Circle and Coffee our hour. I started by inviting Mrs. Chen and a couple more neighbors, women my age, who also spend many hours alone or feeling invisible in their own families. The first session we were 4. Today, we're 12. We meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We read, yes, but we also talk. We talk about our lives, our fears, the times we've been made to feel like we're in the way. We've created an invisible but indestructible support network. Last week we helped Mrs. Rosa review her will so she wouldn't go through what I did. Yesterday we organized a collection to buy medicine for Don Ramirez, the locksmith, who got the flu. My house has filled with laughter, debate, life. I'm no longer the grandmother in the armchair. I'm Martha, the retired chief nursing officer, the organizer, the advisor, the listener. Some neighborhood children have even started coming in the afternoons to do their homework. I've set up the dining room table for them. Seeing their heads bent over books instead of cell phone screens fills me with a satisfaction no TV program could give me. Sometimes I stop in the middle of the living room and think about the irony of it all. Tiffany wanted a modern, productive house full of interesting people. Well, I achieved it, but not her way. Here there are no people in expensive suits talking about phantom investments. Here there are real people with real problems, seeking community solutions. That's true intelligence, the ability to adapt, resist, and flourish in community. I reflect a lot on that afternoon of the torn cable. It was an act of violence, yes, but it was the push I needed. How many women like me are out there, sitting in silence, allowing themselves to be treated like old furniture, afraid to raise their voices for fear of annoying someone or being left alone? We've been sold the idea that old age is a defeat, a stage of submission where we should be grateful for the crumbs of attention thrown our way. What a great lie. Old age is a harvest. It's the moment when we have more experience, more patience, and if we're smart, more freedom than ever. I had all the resources, the house, the pension, legal knowledge. I just lacked the spark of indignation to start the engine. Jason and Tiffany thought they were dealing with a fragile old woman. They forgot that nurses are the guardians of life and health, and we know very well that those who forget to care for others are doomed to repeat their mistakes. I wasn't going to make a mistake in my own biography. Now, when evening falls and the neighbors leave, I sit in my favorite armchair. I have a glass of white wine in one hand and the remote control in the other. Sometimes I watch the news. Sometimes a documentary about monarch butterfly migration. And yes, sometimes I watch my soap opera full of exaggerated drama and impossible passions. The difference is that now I watch it because I want to, because it entertains me, because it's my time and my electricity. I look at the cable hanging from the wall, perfectly installed, black and shiny. It's no longer a chain. It's a trophy. It reminds me that my connection to the world isn't given by a device. I give it to myself through my decisions. The doorbell rings. It's Mrs. Chen. She forgot her shawl. I go to open it with a smile. "Oh, Martha, what a head I have," she says. "Hey, by the way, my grandson asked if he can come tomorrow so you can explain that magic realism thing to him. He says he doesn't understand it at school." "Tell him to come at 5, Mrs. Chen," I respond, "and to bring his notebook. Here we teach that magic is real, but you have to know how to read it." I close the door. The sun sets, painting my books orange. I feel complete. I'm not a victim of my family, nor a burden on society. I'm Martha Caldwell, owner of my house, my time, and my destiny. And if someone doesn't like what I watch on my television, well, the door is very wide and the lock is new. I've learned that dignity isn't negotiated, it's exercised. And that, my dears, is the most intelligent lesson of all. If you enjoyed this story, click subscribe and tell me in the comments what part impressed you. There's more tomorrow. See you there.